Madam President, distinguished guests, ministers, we now come to an informal conversation. I'd like to invite three people to the stage. Roberto Barrero, who's the Program and Communications Director of the International Indian Treaty Council. Well done, Roberto. Celina Abraham, President, Celina, where are you? President of the International Forest Student Association and the GLF Youth Coordinator. And a friend of all of us, Koishi, Dr. Koishi, who is the Chair and CEO of the Global Environment Facility. And what we're going to do is have a conversation about what we've heard, and a conversation about how we bring some groups that absolutely need to be here, whose voices need to be heard, how we bring them into the conversation. So I'm going to come over there. You and I will share one. No, you sit there. Good. Well, look, on behalf of, my name is Andrew Steer, by the way. I'm the President and CEO of the World Resources Institute. For us, it's a great joy and privilege to be heavily engaged with this wonderful forum. I'd like to thank the German government for really leading on this. It's been quite a year, hasn't it, for the German government. G20 did a brilliant job there. The Bonn climate meetings, terrific job there. And now this wonderful meeting. And in the meantime, you had an election which wasn't that simple either. So thank you for all you're doing. And where's Robert Nassi? Thank you. Congratulations on your new job. We're very proud of you. We're really delighted. And thank you for all of the organization of the Global Landscapes Forum. I was really struck listening to the speakers how common the theme was that we need to learn, but we need to put that learning into practice. The organization that I work for, WRI, we have a motto which is count it, change it, scale it. Counting is the analysis, data. But data and analysis on their own, nice to have. It's irrelevant, though, unless it leads to change. We need to prove that the ideas we have work on the ground. But in today's world, quite frankly, pilot success is not enough. We've heard today the incredible urgency that we have. So we need to think about scaling. None of us can scale on our own. Not even big governments can scale on their own. We need to work together. And so in this room, all of us need to be counters, changers, scalers. Some of us will be more on the counting, some more on the changing, some more on the scaling. That's what this is all about. You know, Henri Bergson, the great French philosopher, said we should act as thinkers and we should think as actors. And that's our challenge, isn't it, together? And I want to turn to our panelists now. First of all, Roberto, yourself. Tell us a little bit, we all know about the incredible sort of new insights that have come out recently on the role of indigenous people and the role of land tenure. We did some work last year, for example, that shows if you have land tenure as an indigenous group and you communally manage it and you have the legal right to protect that land, that, for example, deforestation falls by 70 to 80%. And the well-being rises. So we've got a sort of whole range of new understanding about the role of indigenous people. Could you tell us a little bit about the International Indian Treaty Council and what you are trying to do to bring that message in, and why this particular forum is valuable to you?
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation to be here with all of you today and to be part of this conversation. I think as indigenous peoples, fundamentally, we know that we need a seat at the table. And we know that we need a seat at the table because if we're not at the table, then we're probably on the menu. And we've seen that over and over the years throughout our history. And so it's important to raise our visibility in these processes, but also to move beyond the powerful statements that are made, the beautiful statements that are made, and to really see the impact on the ground. We're beyond the declarations. We're beyond this talking and this beautiful way of phrasing things. But now we really need to see the implementation on the ground. I think that's the most important. And for us, it's really about the partnerships, right? For indigenous peoples, oftentimes we're categorized as within and around the vulnerable groups or the marginalized groups. And that's true to a certain extent. We can become vulnerable, but there's reasons for that, right? That has to do with rights, the impacts of colonization, etc. But moving beyond that, we need to be seen as partners, right? Real partners who have solutions. And I think as you just mentioned, and as the research has shown, that when we're not looking for saviors, right? We can save ourselves if we have the right tools and we're given the opportunity to save ourselves. And that comes with the respect of our rights. Oftentimes I hear in these conversations, well, we want to recognize the rights. We want to give indigenous peoples rights. But from an indigenous perspective, I think that we have to be honest about this and say that nobody's giving us our rights. Rights are inherent, right? Our rights are either respected or they're violated. And unfortunately, oftentimes, in the case of indigenous peoples, our rights are violated. So we have to move beyond. We have to have honest conversations. We have to be willing to take the criticism for people who are violating rights, and we have to be able to move on in strong partnerships.
That's fascinating. If you had to sort of summarize sort of how goes the battle for the indigenous people's rights that are so vitally important, what would you say? It was striking, for example, in the so-called NDCs, the Paris commitments, only 21 out of 197 countries referred to indigenous rights. And only one NDC actually said, as part of our climate efforts, we are going to extend those rights. And of course, we've proven that if you want to address rural climate issues, you better give more rights. So, and at the same time, I mean, in the United States, President Trump is pulling back on indigenous people's rights. He just last week cut by 90% sort of the national monument. In Brazil, we've seen some backtracking recently. How would you assess the overall battle?
Well, again, I think that we've seen some advancement in the recognition, right, or the acknowledgement that we have these rights. But I think that we had an earlier session today, a discussion, and it was brought up that while we're talking about the advancement of rights or how these rights, for example, appear, the rights of indigenous peoples appears in the Paris Agreement, in the preamble, and for us, that should set the tone for how everything else is viewed. So we look at that preamble as the way to set the tone for the rest of the document and how the rest of the document should be interpreted. So the rights of indigenous peoples are right up at front, and that means, guidelines like the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, etc. So we have this foundation, we have these guidelines. Again, the implementation, and when we hear, as I was saying this morning, when we're in a time that there's such an extractive movement now, at the same time that the world is saying that we need to pull back, we need to have renewable resources, we need to work with local communities, but we see also this movement or this pressure now of extractives coming in, and we have these human rights defenders, right, who are being murdered. Global Witness did this report where over 200 environmental defenders were murdered in 2016, and a large majority of those people were indigenous peoples. So again, the rhetoric has to match what's happening on the ground, and we have to be honest about this.
Thank you so much. Celina, could we turn to you? You are a youth leader, and you've done remarkable things. You're an economist, you're a forester, and it's wonderful that under this conference series, you're representing young people. And of course, it's going to be your generation that feels the full brunt of some of the things. I did want to thank the President of Mauritius. Madam President, you gave a brilliant speech, really about the challenges. It was a speech of hope, but it was also a speech, quite frankly, of you know, there are some big problems. Now, as you listen to that, Celina, how do you engage with young people? Are they up in arms? Obviously, some are, some aren't, but how do you go about your business?
Well, yeah, I think I have to echo that statement on the speech. What really resonated with me was that it's not optional, and you heard that echoed again by Karen Kemper. It's existential, and for us, you know, a lot of us feel that more because we're talking about these timelines that are more relevant to our futures and where we feel the true effects of the past and the history, and of course we must learn from it. So I think we feel a different sense of responsibility and obligation that is quite unique. But in general, the work that I've done in the past engaging youth, and I've done that through the International Forestry Students Association, as well as the Youth and Landscapes Initiative, which is a global community of young leaders who are committed to this landscapes philosophy of collaboration, diversity, empowering each other in action. So I think that is where I see the true light, and I think we're seeing this with the GLF. It's the power of networks, of coming together. And I'd like to touch on something that it's hard to do that, right? And at least for youth, I can say, and maybe Roberto can echo that for indigenous peoples, it's easy. You get a PR benefit from including voices. It sounds great, but the reality is it's very difficult and it can get messy when you get into the real heart of it. And so I think with the GLF, we have to be ready for those difficult conversations. If we feel like we can just show up and feel good for 2 days and leave, we're not doing our job right. It's really more comfortable to stay in the box than outside. So I'd like to just encourage everyone to remember that, because there's a diversity of voices within youth, within indigenous peoples. I can't stand here and say, you know, we're all like this. We're not. But what I can say is that those at least are in the room have, you know, driven from far. They're sleeping on their friends' couches, and it's all in an effort to learn and to educate themselves more. And, you know, we shouldn't take that for granted and really engage them in that.
That's terrific. We're so happy you're here and that your voice is so clear. Stefan Schmidt made an interesting point, which is that young people tend to leave rural areas. And, you know, 70% of us are going to be urbanized, and so many rural communities, at least in rapidly growing countries, tend to empty of some of their young people in rural areas. How do you think about that issue? I was struck also by what he said, is that actually 90% said they'd like to stay if things were different. How do you relate to that?
You know, it is a sad reality, because I think a lot of migration that often happens, it's not necessarily by choice. It's not that you desire to leave your family and what's normal to you and your culture, but it's this issue of economic opportunity, of conflict that is increasing from not having access to water or other resources. And we know we're going to see an increase of that in the future. And we can't blame young people for wanting to leave and want better. And personally, my family is from Eritrea, so I resonate with that a lot in terms of migration due to political instability or economic opportunity. And it's a reality for so many people. So I think it's something that we don't have an answer towards, but we know that it takes a greater approach. We're talking about transformational change in these rural areas. And I can at least say that on our side, we have youth who are committed. At the past 2 Global Landscapes Forums, we've had discussions on this topic, the youth-led discussion forums on rural migration and what we can do about it as young people. How can we engage with you know, the spaces that we either have left or grew up in. So I think I can say we're committed to continuing this discussion, and I'd like to take that beyond this forum, right? There's so many partnerships that can happen while we're here.
That's terrific. Thank you. We're so happy you're here. Let's turn to now Koishi, your chair and CEO of the Global Fund designed to protect the global commons. So you have a big responsibility. As you listen to the speeches this morning, you must just want to get out there and put more and more resources to make these rural space and landscapes even better, right? Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. Well, actually, we hear a lot of, commitment and passion on the mission. We hear the voices from the ground and voices from the future, and it's a political momentum is kind of gaining in this area. But in order for us to translate those kind of commitment or the vision to the action on the ground, we need a financing, and that's why that our institutions are actually fighting quite hard to get more resources and to do this work. I mean, we were actually in the middle of this and the negotiation, the funding, so-called replenishment negotiation, and for next 4 years we were asking that the 4 billion. But in order for us to do it, the one philosophy centered into this 4-year strategy is actually the transformational system transformation, because in order for us to actually fight against the global tragedy of the commons, we really need to think about how to transform our way of living and consuming and producing, and how to bring the harmony with nature. And besides the cities and the energy system, one very, very important key economic system is actually land use. Then 37% of the GHG emission comes from the agriculture or the land use, and so that's very important for us to actually work through this and the landscape forum, how we could really trigger the system change. And as you mentioned, that the counting and changing and scaling, and we that the GF really want to be a catalyst of the transformational change to the land system use, and also that to scaling up our actions and your actions on the ground, so that we were committed, actually that we are actually thinking to actually 500 million or 4 billion should really go to this food and land use and restoration system change, and another 250 million should really go to Amazon, the Congo, or those important biomes. But the fundamental philosophy of thinking beneath this strategy is how we can bring that all partners network together and on the large-scale landscape, so that we can find out how to reconcile competing demands of the food and the livelihood, but also that how to keep that integrity of the ecosystem, which provides us as a layer of the foundation for the future. So the landscape approach is fundamental for us to reconcile those competing needs and voices from the future, voices from the ground. And that's something we really to try to materialize.
How are we going to get more resources? I mean, it's great listening to the German government, because they actually do put very serious resources into landscapes. Actually, that's not true overall in the international aid architecture, and including even in, say, climate finance. Eric Solheim rightly said that more than 1/3 of the solution to climate change is in rural areas, and yet less than 10% of climate money goes into rural areas. There's something wrong here. Now, Naoko, you are going through a replenishment. You run, one of the best programs in the world on rural areas. I'm hoping that all the donors are queuing up to increase their support for the Global Environment Facility. And if they're not, you have 1 minute to tell them, because some of them are in this room, 1 minute to tell them why they should be doubling their support for Global Environment Facility.
Actually, I really need your help to mobilize the financial resources so that all of us can really do our part to actually end up in this landscape approach to our entire program. It's not just actually that the rural, it's really the system change, the food system, the land use system, energy, and the city system. We all need this transformational change, and integration in the landscape is absolutely important, but donors are a little bit hesitant to how it really works. That we talk about that actually green community, maybe only talking to green community is a problem. Exactly, I think we need to get out of this comfort zone and to really talk to actually people who are yet to be converted. But unless we really do it, we only stay in this comfort zone in the green community, talking to green community, and we will not really save the world. So
Great.
more courage is needed.
Well,
all of us.
we've reached the end of our time. I'm going to give you each one sentence, though. And the question is this: what would you like to get out of this very important global restoration meeting here today and tomorrow? When you leave this place, you'd want to be saying, wow, that was good because what? Roberto.
Well, I'd like to see an increased partnership and visibility of indigenous peoples here. And I'd like to see the movement move from and support the movement from extractive relationships to implementing the indigenous people's principles of reciprocity, right, and regeneration.
Thank you. Perfect.
I think I'd like to see that all the young people who came to attend this conference, and there are more than 200, feel empowered and connected by each other, that they feel connected to the external community of the GLF that can help and support their goals, and that they feel like they learned more from this experience.
Great. Thank you so much. Naoko.
Yeah, at the landscape, you have opportunity, we have opportunity to reconcile all competing demands for the current generation, but also the future generation, indigenous people, and also the people living in actually the outside rural area. But in order for us to do it, we really need to have a courage and vision to get out of this comfort zone. And then I really would like to see to this forum to give us this courage to move out of our own comfort zone towards integration, and integration to the lot of sectoral interest, but integration of the future interest.
Great. Thank you very much. I would like to see us energized and informed and inspired to leave this place so that we push forward towards that wonderful tipping point in landscapes, which we are not a million miles away from right now. I'd like to thank you all. I'm not sure, is this the end of the first session, or do I hand back to you? So thank you very much to this wonderful panel. Let's give them a round of applause.
So may I thank